This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Welcome, Talk Catholic, the website.com, your host, Tim Kilcoyne. No agendas here, just the straight and narrow, through Mary to Jesus, the Catholic faith proclaimed and preserved. Hope to see you here every week. TalkCatholic.com with Tim Kilcoyne. It is for Saturday, time for our interview in part 2 with Father David Nix of PadrePeregrino.com as he takes us through the whole landscape of the church today, for that matter. And we're going to pick it up where he's talking a little bit about the signs of the times. And then in the second half, we'll get back to our book review, all about the theme, Reclaiming Catholic Spirituality and Masculinity. And today's book is called The Three Marks of Manhood by G.C. Dilsaver. Let's hear from Father.
The other possibility is this is just the great apostasy.
Yes.
That was prophesied, that there would be a great falling away.
Yeah.
And then Christ just returns. And
Yes.
in that sense, we are in pre-apocalyptic days, and we could very well see the return of Christ in our lifetime, even in the next year.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
You know, every time I talk like this, some smarty pants out there says, "Oh, but Jesus said you don't know the day or the hour," and it's like, yeah, I know, but he didn't say you don't know the decade, right?
Okay. or not read the signs of the times.
Exactly. I don't claim to know the decade, as you can tell from the two theses I just put forward. But if you read Matthew 24, we have a whole list of things we're going to see at the end of the world that was not in previous difficult times in the church. You know, people say, well, there's always been difficult times in the church.
Right.
But we've never had someone on the chair of Peter worship a Pachamama statue. We've never had the Vatican tell priests to bless gay blessings.
Exactly.
That has never happened in 2,000 years of history. So the people that say, "Oh, we've always had hard times," no, we are checking the list off yearly. Matthew 24 that we've never seen before.
I agree with you. The primary difference as you look at church history is, we had some real characters for popes, right? Bad apples, some of them. Alexander the Sixth, right? You know, I mean, the bottom line is that they weren't tampering with doctrine and dogma.
And that's right. He gave it the Angelus. Alexander the Sixth.
Yeah, they had
he was a bad dude for sure. But he never touched the faith.
That's it. They weren't trying to change, and this leads me a little bit in the direction of the politics. The mindset of our current clergy seems to be imbued with a political mindset as opposed to a shepherding mindset. I was just watching the last couple of nights the old movie Mission, right? The Jesuits down in South America.
A couple of mistakes in it, but it's very good.
Oh my God! The St. Francis Xavier zeal to save souls and to go literally to the ends of the earth as they climb up that mountain, right, and the falls. I mean, it's not, and you compare that to what Pope Francis was talking about, like that evangelization is proselytizing kind of thing, you know.
And it's prohibited, he said.
Yeah. I mean,
I think he said it's a mortal sin, actually, or something like that.
Did he actually say that?
Yeah, it's sinful to proselytize,
Oh, proselytize, okay, technically. Okay. I also saw that in a private, one of his interviews with a television guy over there in Italy, you know, he didn't even, I didn't even know this, he didn't even have a hard time with cohabitation.
Well, he said, if you remember what he said right around the same time, it was within 2 years of Amoris Laetitia, which, again, I'm sure all your listeners remember, Amoris Laetitia claims that divorced and remarried can receive Holy Communion without an annulment.
Right.
It was either 2 years prior to that or 2 years after that, he said, those cohabitating are receiving the graces of a sacramental marriage, the same graces.
Yeah, unbelievable. Unbelievable.
That's absolutely satanic. It's inverted marriage to be encouraging divorce and sacrilegious communion, and then it tells cohabitating people somehow mysteriously they're receiving the same graces as Catholics. I mean, that, once again, let's look at this. Did that come from an angel or a demon?
Exactly.
Clearly a demon. And I realize I'm going to answer to God for every single thing I say on the radio. And I double down on that. That is satanic.
Oh yeah, no. Okay, therefore, give us a primer on grace itself and why all of this goes to the heart of this, this great mystery of faith of ours.
Yeah. I mean, I think the church exists to save souls, and one of the things I've noticed that even very good Catholics get mixed up is, do you have to be Catholic to be saved? Do you have to be baptized to be saved? True that Jesus is the only way to the Father. And usually what people do is they set up the most extreme example, say like the Feeneyite view, and then somehow anything that isn't Feeneyite has to be like Universalist Unitarian. Well, let me put it this way. Here's what the church teaches. And I'm not a Feeneyite, but I just mean, let's look at what the church has always taught.
Right.
I really like how St. Thomas Aquinas puts it, because it's in a very non-scary, very digestible way. That heaven is a supernatural goal, okay? Heaven is a supernatural goal. Therefore, no amount of natural goodness will get there. That's why you actually need grace to get to heaven. That's achieved through faith in the Blessed Trinity, and it's achieved through the sacraments. And so it doesn't matter how good of a life you live. Now, we're not Protestants. We're not faith alone. Clearly, what we do is that's going to tie into our judgment.
Exactly.
The reason you can't get to heaven without grace, which is either baptism or can pagans be somehow given perfect contrition on their deathbed? There's different theories on that. But even then, here's the key. Even for the pagan dying on the deathbed, if that person is somehow receives what St. Thomas Aquinas calls the implicit desire for baptism, or what St. Catherine of Genoa calls perfect contrition, they still have to be saved by grace. And so all of
the good thief on the cross.
He was actually saved under the old law, under the Old Testament rules, not the New Testament.
Oh, okay.
He's a good example.
Okay.
But, the liberal Catholics out there are just Universalist Unitarians. How about the conservative Catholics? Even conservative Catholics have been snowed by this thing that you and I were just discussing, conscience. They actually believe, well, God's not a big meanie pants, so anyone following their conscience automatically has to be saved.
Right.
Anybody who lived in invincible ignorance, provided it wasn't invincible ignorance, well, they have to be saved. Well, you mentioned 5 minutes ago St. Francis Xavier. If that were the case, then God never would have given the gift of raising the dead to someone like St. Francis Xavier, who went to literally millions of people who would have otherwise been able to claim before God invincible ignorance. So if they were still saved, why did St. Francis Xavier go across all of Asia eating half a bowl of rice every day maximum to baptize 500,000 people if invincible ignorance and conscience was enough to save them?
Exactly.
Well, I'll tell you why. It's because he believed in grace, that we can't get to heaven without grace.
This is key.
St. Xavier and St. Thomas Aquinas both would have believed it doesn't matter how good of a life you live. Goodness, natural goodness will not get you to a supernatural goal. You have to have supernatural goodness through the sacraments in order to attain our goal, which is heaven, which is a supernatural good, not a natural good.
And don't you believe that if you don't believe this in its essence and true kernel of Catholicity, then it opens the Pandora's box to be open, quote unquote, to all these aberrations morally.
Yes.
By the clergy.
And once you reject divine revelation and make up your own, even if you sprinkle in the names of Jesus and Mary occasionally, once you've decided to reject divine revelation, you are as bad as a Protestant, if not worse, because at that point, anything goes. And that's exactly what we see in the lives of half the clergy in the world at this point, is truly anything goes.
Right. And which again maybe moves us a little bit in the direction of that podcast you do with Taylor Marshall. But when it comes to interpersonal conflict and these assaults on family life by way of addictions, especially alcoholism, pornography, etc., where do you go with this when it comes to conflict resolution? How do you discern that which is truly, especially on the part of a baptized and confirmed Catholic, do they ever lose complete awareness of what the heck they're doing, even though there's substance abuse going on?
Tim, I'm a little unsure of the question. I hear 2 or 3 questions in there.
Okay.
Which one do you want me to start with?
Well, I feel that there's a copping out these days, not only on the part of the leadership, but on the part of family members who want to kind of hide behind the number of reasons for the problem within the family. Whereas, and these are very much the same people who don't pray, for instance. They don't pray that much. They may go to church. There's a reception of the sacraments going on, and yet there's an acceptance of dysfunction within family life that seems to be okay. Doesn't talk to me?
Yeah, I mean, we saw this in the shooting in Minneapolis, that woman, the mother, who apparently was a much more conservative person than the husband. That only came out a few days after the shooting.
Yeah.
The mother was quite conservative, they say, and the father was quite liberal. So, at first everyone was blaming the mother, including myself, and then the father apparently was much more liberal. Turns out that he celebrated his son's quote-unquote transition on Facebook. However, the mother did sign off on his, legal change of name from male to female when this boy was just 17 and a half years old. And so a lot of people defending the mother online said, look, she was probably under pressure because a lot of times in these situations of transition, the youth threaten suicide if their parents don't support them. Okay, maybe that's true. Maybe the mother only signed off on the future shooter's transition because she was under pressure, because he threatened suicide. Well, my reply to that is, how did that work out? Did signing it actually save him from suicide?
Yeah.
No, he committed suicide after all.
Right.
And so this is where the end doesn't justify the means. If I could teach Catholic Morality 101 to everyone in seminary, to all lay people, even though actually even in modernist seminaries, somehow they give a little bit of a head nod towards the direction of the fact that the end doesn't justify the means. Pretty much 95% of the priests in the confessional coast to coast of the United States really do believe in this notion the end justifies the means.
Unbelievable.
Somehow, if you're under pressure or life is hard, you are allowed to sin. If your son tells you he's going to disown you and leave you unless you sign off on his transition, then you have to do it for the sake of the family. No, go look at the crucifix for 5 minutes. Jesus could have saved himself from that by appeasing the Pharisees, and yet he didn't. He called them out, and it did get him crucified, and that was exactly what redeemed the world. And so many families out there are misled by psychologists, by priests, by this notion of the primacy of conscience, that they have to sign on to their kids' dysfunction, or their kid's going to leave them, or their kid's going to commit suicide, or whatever else. And no, this is where, again,
they've adopted what is the good and the evil that you're doing?
That's what I mean. The end doesn't justify the means. You can never do something evil so that good comes from it.
Right.
And the Minnesota shooter shows us no good came from her signing off on his transition anyway.
Yeah. Well, let me add quick. You made the note of the difference, the kind of a dichotomy of liberal and conservative on the part of the parents. Can we speak a little bit, to the primacy of the patriarch? A bad word in these politically incorrect times, right? Give us. It's my position that one of the reasons for you hear about the merry-go-round of alcoholism or the merry-go-round of whatever, I mean, there's like an endless cycle in family histories where it's almost like it never gets broken, and it seems like 9 times out of 10 it has something more to do with the father being AWOL. Can you speak a little bit about the role of the man within family life and marriage?
I'm sure a lot of your listeners have seen the studies that first came out in Protestant circles, but they proved to be just as true for Catholic circles. It's just evangelicals seem to have had a bigger population for study. And what they've discovered is that when the father is going to Sunday church, and I say church again because it came from a Protestant study, that's why I don't use the word mass here, but when the father's going to church, the chance that the kids are going to be practicing that same faith by the time they grow up is something like 95%.
Wow.
Where if the mother is practicing the faith, but the father is not, it's something like 15 or 20%.
I think I've heard that.
Neither are. It's like obviously like less than 5%. But clearly they have statistical proof. The number one determinant on if your kids keep the faith is if the father of the family. So people say, well, like you said, that sounds patriarchal, that sounds like it's not politically correct. It doesn't matter. That's just the numbers. That's just the statistics right there.
Right.
That the kids are going to follow the father's faith into their adulthood, whether you like it or not.
Right. So is there an ontological, to use a big word, spiritual leadership attached, assigned to the father figure?
Yes, if you look in the Old Testament, many times there was a husband married to a woman who was holier than him, but God still chose the blessing to go through the father.
Very good.
So I think a lot of times when people hear that the blessing comes through the father to the sons, from the father to the wife, to the daughters, many people think, again, that sounds sexist or patriarchal or whatever, but it's not necessarily a mention of holiness. I mean, just look at the Holy Family. Obviously, the holiest was Jesus, and then Mary, and then Joseph, and none of them, of course, ever committed any venial or mortal sin. I would even hold Joseph never even committed a venial sin. So by holy level of glory, I don't mean any of them sinned, of course.
Right.
Just the level of glory. Of course, the Son of God has the highest level of glory, and then the Immaculate Virgin Mary is next, and then Joseph is third. Yet, who is in charge of that family? It was Saint Joseph, and so. Still, God showed, and so that shows that it's not always a one-to-one correlation between who God chooses to have the blessing pass through and the level of holiness in the family. So God has chosen the father to be the channel for the blessing for the whole family, or apparently the curse. I mean, this is
very good.
Addictions and everything else. That's kind of a big debate in the exorcism world right now. Are there generational curses? But even for the people that reject that notion, well, it's not very hard to trace, like you said, alcoholism through the history of the same family.
Great sequel to finish up with, Father, as we turn to our book review, Reclaiming Catholic Spirituality. I'm using a series of books. Today's book is going to be called The Three Marks of Manhood by G.C. Dilsaver, How to Be a Priest, Prophet, and King of Your Family. On the other side, this is WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. So again, in our last session with Kennedy Hall and Terror of Demons, he was keeping the focus on knowing what sin is, mortal versus venial, and to be sure that you do take venial sin seriously so it doesn't escalate into mortal sin, which is more than possible, and that just going to confession, if you're not quite sure if it's a mortal sin that you've committed, just going gives you new graces to strengthen you to be strong against the same temptation next time. So it's always worth going to confession. And all of that is so important to stay in what we call and still do a state of grace. So men, you can't be men if you're not in God's grace. So let's now pick that up relative to your role as father and relative to what Father Nix just was talking about in modeling St. Joseph. G.C. Dilsaver says, moreover, it is the principle of Christian patriarchy that today best speaks to the Church herself, for it is a principle that not only applies to husbands and familial fathers, but to all Christian men, and most certainly to priests and bishops. It is Christian patriarchal fatherhood, with its requirements of magnanimous leadership and sacrificial service, that perfects manhood. The call to Christian patriarchy is simultaneously a call to Catholic womanhood, back to the ideal of the cloister, home, or convent, to the hidden life of maternal and spousal sanctification. The reestablishing of a Christian patriarchy, no matter how quiet and domestic the implementation, will require heroic virtue. For this establishment will entail not only a confrontation with contemporary secular society, but a confrontation with the very fury of hell, which is already fully engaged in a demonic blitzkrieg against fatherhood, motherhood, the unborn, and the traditional family. Although it is certain that no matter the ferocity of the enemy, the gates of hell shall not prevail against this holy church, in order to meet today's unprecedented challenge, the Christian patriarchal order of the family established must itself be unprecedented. Indeed, the Christian patriarchy must be a new order purified of all selfish motives or worldly modes of brute dominance and based for the first time solely on Christ and his divine commission. If such an order is established, a new Christendom, be it small or great, will follow. Such a Christendom will be steadfast and transcendent, unswayed by the political currents and power curves of the world, because it will be rooted in the sacramental unit of the family and in the sanctified souls of the faithful. Yet never before has there been a generation of men so unsuited to the establishing of an authentic Christian patriarchy. The Western male, in particular, is found to have pawned his patriarchy for pleasure.
he is thoroughly inculcated in the values of extended adolescence, and even where he rejects certain extremes of playboyism, he has nonetheless, as a whole, acquiesced to the assaults of a hedonistic, immodest, and pornographic society, to the dominating search for pleasure and entertainment, to the beckon of a consumeristic society and the sophisticated toys it proffers, to contracepting his seed, and to the shirking of his duty to lead, protect, and provide for the family. Yes, Christian men, and in particular the Western male, who was once the standard-bearer of Christendom, has become satiated and complacent. He has allowed the state to intrude into the once sacrosanct domain of the family, to the extent that the marriage bond itself has become less binding than even casual oral business contracts, severable by mere request. He has stood by while his wife serves the corporation and state, relegating home and family to a secondary concern. He has caused himself to be, in effect, castrated, and has permitted his offspring to be murdered in the womb. The result is that both the church and Christian family have been emasculated. For the most part, even remnant Orthodox Catholic families are matriarchies. As such, the church, emasculated at the familial and parish level, is quite unable to give appropriate and effective battle to the demonic forces aligned against her. I.e., we haven't heard a mad as hell masculine sermon in decades, and if the chancery is the power positions of the diocese is occupied by hardcore feminist theologians from Jesuit universities, how do you think we're ever going to get that sermon? The priest is going to be in the woodshed every time on Monday morning. Everything he's saying is spot on, ladies and gentlemen, from a Catholic perspective, and we don't force anybody to be Catholic. Nevertheless, we don't want to hear it because of our politically incorrect times and the amount of time that this effeminization has taken place. The only thing I would add to what he's saying is that, yes, pornography is one of the great new sins, but I think alcoholism primary. Alcoholism is the open door, the first door that leads to men becoming the couch potato, which is basically what he's describing here. And the women then take over and dominate and control, and now the family goes upside down. It's an age-old story that goes back to Adam and Eve, I believe. But you got to talk about it every once in a while. And he just dared to suggest that women need to get in tune with their maternal instinct and possibly be submissive. He didn't use the word yet. Let's go on. It's kind of simple. It's not a complicated playbook that our Lord put into motion. And if the father figure, or man in general, I hearken to his words, Christian men in general, even though they may not be fathers. How about siblings? How about the older brother making sure that the younger brother isn't looking at pornography on that cell phone at 12 years of age? It's okay for you teenagers to rise up. You want to be rebellious, be traditional. I've said that 1,000 times. There's a fight out there against these principalities that he's talking about. The principalities of good and evil are there at your public school every day, not to mention our Catholic schools. Let's not kid ourselves. So the battle is on for sure, and it's a call to Christian manhood without question. And by the way, you notice what he said a little bit about, bringing women back to the cloister and the home or the convent and the hidden life. Oh, oh my goodness. Why am I thinking of The View? Let us go on. Quickly. Subtopic, the divine response to the times. Whether it is a case of his abdication and usurpation, the Christian Western male has been soundly deposed in his role as father, leader, protector, and patriarch in a society that is maliciously and increasingly anti-Christian and anti-family. How then is a new and deeper understanding of fatherhood and patriarchy to be brought about in a day when Christian manhood is at its lowest ebb? Well, it's by very reason of the unprecedented destruction of the family and the debilitation of manhood that this is the age of the Christian family and the Christian patriarch. For the Almighty in his economy of grace confounds evil by turning its greatest apparent triumphs into its greatest defeats, from Adam's tragic fall to the dark Friday when God himself was crucified, which is called good. It is this economy of grace that topples the mighty and proud by raising up the lowly and weak, thus making it perfectly clear that the power of God, not men, is at work. Where sin abounded, grace did all the more. Yes, it is precisely because there has never been a time so desperately in need of men able to answer the call of the Christian patriarchy, nor a time when there has been such such an unsuitable selection of these men that Christians may justifiably expect an unparalleled outpouring of God's miraculous grace and favor on Christian manhood and on the family he is called to lead. Mirroring God's economy of grace is the church's response to the crises of the time. Throughout the history of the church, specific dogmas and morals have been defined, defended, and emphasized when the corollary heresy or immorality reached proportions that required it. Today, when there is confusion about even the most elementary and essential characteristics of sexual identity, the church is called to define truths about family, fatherhood, and motherhood, truths that have never needed defining or defending ever before. Well, as we just come out of Christmas tide, good Christian men rejoice because God notices you. I'm thinking of a lovely gal who's blind, and when she went blind, she made the comment, God noticed me. Wow, that's the kind of humility before our Lord that men need to have to rise up again. And you can, with us, right here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM, pointing to your star, a star that remains ever unchanging. His name is still Jesus Christ. Have a great week, everyone. God bless. Let your light shine. That is what it's all about here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. But we need to hear your story. You want your voice to be his voice. That is making the faith known to others. Please, my number is 877-625-3727. Tim Kilcoyne, TalkCatholic.com. St. Mother Teresa told us, your ministry is your work right where you are. Grab on to this microphone. God bless.